In 2006, a hospital in New Jersey ran a drug trial. The patients were 112 children waiting for surgery. Some got midazolam, a sedative. Some got a toy. As the anesthesia mask came down, the sedated children still grew more anxious. The children holding the toy stayed calm. The drug lost to the toy. The toy is one you've held yourself, one model or another. The first model arrived in 1989. A gray plastic brick with a screen the color of pea soup. Nintendo called it the Game Boy. In 1989, you would have bet against it. Every spec you could read said its rivals were the future. Color, backlights, twice the power. It had a screen that blurred the parts nobody else wanted on purpose. So which was it? Genius or a fluke that lasted a decade? So who builds a machine like that? Not a designer, the man who fixed the machines. Nintendo had made playing cards since 1889, and by the mid-60s, that business was dying. Gunpei Yokoi had an electronics degree in exactly one job: keep the card printers running, not designing, maintenance. What he did with his own time was build things for his own amusement. One of them was an extending lattice arm that grabbed things from across a room. It had no purpose whatsoever. His president, Hiroshi, needed anything at all to sell that Christmas, saw the toy, and shipped it. The Ultra Hand sold over 1.2 million units. The repairman was moved off the assembly line and into research. Everything he made afterwards came from one rule: take technology so old it's cheap, boring, and fully understood, then point it somewhere new. Lateral thinking with withered technology, he called it. Engineers found the idea insulting, accountants found it beautiful. Then, he pointed it at a games console. Nintendo did not understand what he was proposing. He later said that he used his standing in the company to push it through anyway. And when it finally shipped, the entire industry told him he was wrong. They had a point. It lost to every rival on every specification. No backlight, no color, fast movement smeared. Inside Nintendo, staff reportedly nicknamed his prototype Dame Game, roughly the hopeless game. Morale was strong. Even his own deputy, Okada, fought him on it. The two went through the design piece by piece. Okada pushed for a more capable machine. Yokoi held out for the cheapest one that would still work. Okada said he won more of those arguments than he lost, so Yokoi gave up arguing. What he said to his deputy was 4 words: do what you want. That settled the argument inside Nintendo. Outside it, the one that mattered was just starting. The staffer came to Yokoi with a grim face. There was a new handheld on the market, he said, and it has a color screen. Yoki's entire reply was 3 words: then we're fine. He wasn't bluffing. The machine was Atari's Lynx. Color, backlit, $179.99. Sega's Game Gear came next. Both of them beat the Game Boy on paper, and Yokoi had chosen his bad screen on purpose. Because color and backlights eat batteries. The rivals ran out of juice in 3 to 5 hours. His gray brick ran for 15 to 30. A 12-year-old on a school bus doesn't care about color depth. She cares whether the screen is still on. And his cost $89.95, half of Lynx. Atari built the better machine for engineers. The repairman built the better one for parents. Parents have the money, but he just built himself a much bigger problem. A games machine is worth exactly the games on it, and every game Nintendo made was for children. So Yokoi had built a machine cheap enough for a parent to buy, with nothing on it a parent would want to play. That is a ceiling, and it is a low one. The answer came from the other side of the Iron Curtain. A Dutch salesman flew to Soviet Moscow. He talked his way into a state ministry, uninvited, and came out holding the handheld rights to a puzzle game. A Russian computer scientist had written it. Nintendo put it in the box with every Game Boy it sold in the West. Tetris did what no Nintendo game had ever done. It sold the machine to people who had never wanted one. Commuters, parents, offices. The gray brick stopped being a toy, and Yoki's ceiling disappeared. Atari's color machine sold 3 million. Yoki's sold 118 million. The screen everyone told him to fix was still bad. Nobody was calling it a hopeless game anymore. Cheap, tough, and everywhere. That is how a toy beats a sedative, and the machine was not finished with him yet. By the mid-90s, the Game Boy was 7 years old and sliding. Its parts had not been new when Yoki chose them, and now they were fossils and Nintendo had stopped expecting much. Which is the only reason the next thing happened. A dying machine is cheap to build for, cheap enough to risk something strange on it. In February 1996, something strange shipped. It was called Pokemon. It ran on the obsolete gray brick and brought the whole platform back from the dead. Pokemon is now the highest grossing media franchise in history, ahead of Star Wars and ahead of Marvel. More than $100 billion. And it exists because a repairman built a machine so cheap that it was still worth making games for years after everyone had written it off. 6 months later, after 31 years in Nintendo, Yoki walked out the door. Nobody agrees on why. The press wrote that he'd been pushed out over a failed 3D headset. He denied that version on record. Nobody can settle it now. What he did next was start his own lab and go back to designing handhelds. He had a little over a year. On October 4th, 1997, his car rear-ended a truck on the Hikaru Expressway. He stepped out to check the damage and was struck by passing cars. He was 56. The fortune was never his. He was an employee on a salary, hired to keep the card machine running. And the case against him is simple. He did not write Tetris. He did not write Pokemon. He built a cheap box, and the two biggest things in games happened to land on it. There was even a witness. Okada, the deputy who was told to do what he wanted. The machine that conquered the world, he said, was never the one that Yoki wanted to build. Yoki's version was a cheap toy, meant to last a season or two. Now you know how they made it. A repairman's spare time toy, a rule about old parts, and a cartridge carried out of Moscow. Somewhere in your house, there's an old machine you refuse to replace because it still works. That is the doctrine, and it outlived its author. So you get the last word. Genius, or a fluke that lasted a decade. Make your case in the comments. I read them all. Thanks for watching.